The dress had no origin. No seamstress claimed its creation, no records traced its past. It was found in a locked chest beneath the floorboards of St. Augustine's church, wrapped in silk as thin as spiderwebs. The lace had yellowed with age, but the fabric beneath remained pristine, too pristine, as if untouched by time. The bride, Margaret Halloway, chose it the moment she saw it. She did not know why. It was as though something in the fabric recognized her, as though it had been waiting. The moment she ran her fingers over the embroidered lace, a shiver danced down her spine. Her mother, standing beside her, frowned but said nothing. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with omens. A flock of crows circled the church at dawn, their cries drowning out the morning bells. The seamstress who adjusted the dress pricked her finger and bled so much it stained the floorboards. The groom, Andrew, dreamed of his bride standing at the altar with black pits where her eyes should be, but the ceremony continued. On the wedding day, a heavy fog rolled in, swallowing the town in its damp, suffocating grip. The guests arrived in hushed tones, their steps muted on the cobblestone path. Inside the church, the air felt thick, cloying, as though something unseen was pressing against their lungs. Candles flickered erratically, their flames stretching toward the vaulted ceiling like grasping fingers. Then Margaret entered. The moment she stepped inside, the church breathed. The wooden beams groaned as though bearing a great weight. The stone floor trembled, subtle but undeniable. She walked slowly, the hem of her dress whispering against the ground. The lace seemed to shimmer, twisting, shifting, as if something beneath it was moving. With each step she took, the air grew colder. The guests shivered, pulling their coats tighter around them. Someone coughed, the sound sharp, wet. The scent of burning wax thickened. By the time she reached the altar, the first scream rang out. The maid of honour, standing closest to Margaret, convulsed violently. Her eyes rolled back, her mouth stretching open wider than it should. Then, with a sickening snap, her jaw dislocated, spilling forth a stream of lace. The fabric poured from her throat in an endless cascade, twisting, tightening, choking her as she collapsed to the floor. The dress shuddered.
I think I'm having a heart attack here.
Before anyone could react, the priest gasped, clutching at his chest. His ribs cracked, bending outward like broken fingers. The skin along his arms split, jagged edges peeling back to reveal something black writhing beneath. He fell forward, his face striking the stone floor, but he did not bleed. The church doors slammed shut. The panic spread like fire. Guests scrambled, clawing at the heavy wooden doors, pounding their fists against the iron-bolted frames. The flower girl sobbed, her tiny hands covering her face as blood dripped between her fingers. Her eyes, those once bright blue eyes, melted in their sockets, leaking down her cheeks in thick red streaks. The dress tightened. Margaret's arms were rigid at her sides, her fingers locked into claws. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling with unnatural precision. The bodice of the gown constricted, pressing against her ribs with crushing force. The fabric curled at the edges, darkening, blooming with something deep and black. A groomsman stumbled backward, his foot catching on the hem of the bride's veil. He barely had time to scream before the fabric lunged. It wrapped around his throat, pulling, twisting, sinking into his flesh. His skin bubbled, blackened, flaked away in charred ribbons. His body spasmed, then split, his torso peeling apart as something inside him crawled free. The walls shook. The stained glass windows cracked, fractures spiralling like veins through the painted saints. The candles erupted, their flames twisting into elongated shapes, stretching toward the ceiling like skeletal limbs. The shadows in the corners of the church moved, lengthening, merging, watching. The priest, still gasping on the floor, began to whisper. The words were not his own. His voice layered, shifting, overlapping, as if 100 voices were speaking through his torn throat. The guests, those who had not yet succumbed, pressed themselves against the walls, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Then the bells began to toll. 1. The chandeliers overhead fell, shattering upon impact, shards of glass embedding themselves into soft flesh. 2. The pews splintered, jagged wooden stakes erupting upward, impaling those who tried to flee. 3. The dress rippled, its fabric tearing, revealing something beneath, a shape not meant for human eyes. 4. The ceiling buckled, beams twisting, snapping like brittle bones. Dust rained down in thick, choking clouds. 5. The walls split, black tendrils slithering forth, wrapping around limbs, pulling, devouring. 6. The ground beneath the altar collapsed, revealing a gaping void, a chasm of writhing darkness. 7. The groom Andrew screamed, but his voice did not reach her. His body contorted, his spine bending backward, snapping like a withered branch. The darkness took him. 8. Margaret's lips parted, her breath a thin whisper. The dress, now fully alive, twisted around her, merging with her flesh, sinking into her skin. Her face hollowed, her features melting away into a pale, formless mask. 9. The final guests fell, their bodies pulled apart, their screams lost in the howling storm that now raged within the church. 10. The church collapsed. The walls folded inward, the roof caving, the very foundation sinking into the chasm. The bell tower fell last, its final toll ringing out across the desolate, empty town. And then, silence. Nothing remained. No bodies, no ruins. Only the scorched earth where St. Augustine's once stood. And somewhere buried deep beneath the soil, the dress waited for the next bride.